A 1912 studio photo shows a bride. When they zoom in on her veil, they discover a shocking truth. Detective Rebecca Walsh browsed vintage photographs at Murphy's Antiques in downtown Chicago, searching for her mother's birthday gift. Among boxes of sepia-toned wedding portraits, one image stopped her cold. A wedding photograph from 1912 showed a couple in formal pose. The groom stood tall and proud in a dark suit, his face clearly visible. A distinguished man in his 50s with a thick mustache and confident expression. Beside him stood the bride in an elaborate white gown with intricate beading, but the bride's face was completely hidden. An extraordinarily thick lace veil cascaded from an ornate headpiece, creating an impenetrable curtain over her features. Unlike typical wedding photographs where brides revealed their faces, this veil remained fully drawn, obscuring every detail of the woman beneath. The groom's hand rested on her shoulder, possessive and proud. The bride's posture suggested confidence rather than demure shyness. Her hands, visible below the veil, were clasped at her waist. The studio mark read, Harrison Photography, Chicago, June 22, 1912. Strange, isn't it? The shop owner said. Wedding photo where you can't see the bride's face. Found it in an estate sale. No information about who they were. Rebecca's detective instincts activated. Why would a bride hide her face completely in her own wedding portrait? She purchased the photograph immediately, sensing this was more than just an unusual picture. This was evidence of something dark. Rebecca brought the photograph to her office at Chicago PD's cold case unit. She set up her high-resolution scanner and began systematic examination. The groom's face was clear and distinctive. She could potentially identify him through historical records. She started with the date, June 22, 1912. Chicago marriage licenses were meticulously recorded. She searched the archives and found it quickly. Thomas Whitmore, age 52, widower, married to Helen Stone, age 35, June 22, 1912. Thomas Whitmore appeared in city business directories as owner of Whitmore Manufacturing, a successful furniture company. Newspaper Society columns from early 1912 mentioned his engagement to Miss Helen Stone, recently arrived from St. Louis. But then Rebecca found something chilling. A death notice from July 15, 1912, less than a month after the wedding. Thomas Whitmore, prominent businessman, died suddenly at his residence. Cause, apparent heart failure. Survived by wife, Mrs. Helen Whitmore, private funeral services. Rebecca searched for more details. The brief police report noted, subject found deceased in bed. Wife reported he complained of chest pains during the night. Family physician signed death certificate, heart failure. No autopsy performed. No suspicious circumstances noted. Thomas Whitmore had died 3 weeks after his wedding. His new wife, Helen, had inherited his substantial estate, his business, his home, his bank accounts, everything. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. She searched for what happened to Helen Whitmore after her husband's death. Property records showed she'd sold the house and business within 2 months, liquidating everything. Then Helen Whitmore simply vanished from Chicago records. No forwarding address, no further documentation. A wealthy man had married a woman whose face was hidden in their wedding photograph. 3 weeks later, he was dead. His widow had taken everything and disappeared. Rebecca expanded her search beyond Chicago. If Helen Stone had killed Thomas Whitmore and disappeared with his money, had she done this before? She searched St. Louis records, the city Helen had supposedly come from. In St. Louis, she found a similar case. March 1911. A widower named Robert Mitchell, age 48, owner of a textile importing business, had married Margaret Stone. 2 months later, Robert Mitchell died suddenly. Heart failure. His widow, Margaret, inherited everything, sold the assets quickly, and vanished. Rebecca's hands trembled as she searched further back. Indianapolis, September 1910. James Harrison, age 55, banker, married Catherine Stone. 6 weeks later, James died. Heart failure. His widow inherited and disappeared. Kansas City, May 1910. William Bradford, age 50, merchant, married Elizabeth Stone. 1 month later, William died. Heart failure. Widow inherited and vanished. The pattern was unmistakable. A woman using variations of Stone as a surname would arrive in a city, target wealthy widowers, marry them quickly, and within weeks they'd die of apparent natural causes. She'd inherit everything, liquidate the assets, and move to a new city to repeat the process. Rebecca counted at least 6 cases between 1910 and 1912. possibly more in cities with poor record preservation. The woman had killed at least 6 husbands, inheriting fortunes each time, moving systematically across the Midwest. But who was she really? Stone was clearly an alias. Her first name changed with each marriage. Helen, Margaret, Catherine, Elizabeth. She was a ghost, leaving trails of dead husbands and empty bank accounts. Rebecca returned to the wedding photograph, studying that hidden face beneath the veil. The woman had concealed her identity in every city, never allowing herself to be clearly photographed or documented. This wedding photo was the only image Rebecca had found, and even here, the killer's face was completely obscured. But maybe the veil held secrets. Rebecca began high-resolution scanning of the veil, hoping modern technology might reveal what a century-old camera had captured. As she zoomed in on the intricate lace patterns, something unexpected appeared. The veil's lace was extraordinarily detailed, floral and geometric patterns creating layers of translucency. But within those layers, barely visible, were reflections. During the long exposure required for 1912 photography, the reflective threads of the lace had captured images. Rebecca enhanced the brightness and contrast. Her breath caught. There, ghosted into different sections of the veil, were faces. Not the bride's face, that remained completely hidden, but other faces, masculine faces, captured in the lace's reflective surface. She counted 6 distinct faces reflected in the veil, all men, all middle-aged, all with formal expressions as if from portrait photographs. Rebecca isolated each face, creating separate enhanced images. Then she began comparing them to the records she'd compiled. The first face matched Robert Mitchell from St. Louis, the textile importer who died in 1911. The second matched James Harrison from Indianapolis, the banker who died in 1910. The third matched William Bradford from Kansas City, the merchant who died in 1910. Rebecca identified 3 more faces, men from cities she hadn't yet researched: Cincinnati, Detroit, Louisville. She searched death records from those cities and found them. George Sullivan, Cincinnati, 1909. Henry Morrison, Detroit, 1909. Charles Bennett, Louisville, 1908. All wealthy widowers. All had died within weeks of marriage to women using Stone surnames. All had left everything to their new widows. The killer had been holding photographs of her previous victims during her wedding to Thomas Whitmore. She'd literally surrounded herself with images of the men she'd murdered, and the reflective veil had captured them during the long exposure. It was a trophy collection, and she'd accidentally preserved evidence of her crimes in her own wedding photograph. Rebecca needed to understand how the killer had murdered her husband so consistently without arousing suspicion. She requested exhumation orders for the bodies, hoping modern toxicology could reveal what 1912 medicine had missed. Thomas Whitmore's grave at Graceland Cemetery was opened first. The embalming process had preserved tissue samples sufficiently for testing. Dr. Sarah Kim, a forensic toxicologist, performed comprehensive analysis. The results were definitive: massive doses of arsenic in the tissue samples. This man was poisoned over several weeks, Dr. Kim explained. Small doses initially, then increasing amounts. The symptoms would mimic heart disease, fatigue, chest pains, irregular heartbeat. In 1912, physicians wouldn't have tested for poison unless they suspected foul play. A wealthy middle-aged man dying of apparent heart failure wouldn't raise suspicions. Rebecca obtained exhumation orders for 3 other victims whose graves could be located. Each showed the same result: arsenic poisoning. The killer had used a consistent method, slow poisoning, that mimicked natural illness, giving her time to ensure inheritance documents were properly filed before the deaths. Arsenic was readily available in 1912, sold legally for pest control and various household purposes. A woman could purchase it without suspicion. Mixed into food or drink over weeks, it would kill reliably while appearing to be natural illness. The killer had perfected her method through at least 7 murders. She'd learned the precise dosing, enough to kill within weeks, but slowly enough to avoid obvious poisoning symptoms. She'd learned to play the concerned wife, caring for her ailing husband while administering the poison that killed him. Rebecca searched pharmacy records from the cities where murders had occurred. In 3 cities, she found purchase records for a Mrs. Stone buying arsenic, listed for pest control purposes. The same woman, using her alias, leaving a paper trail she'd believed would never be connected to murders diagnosed as heart failure. Rebecca needed to discover who the killer really was before she became Stone. She searched missing person reports and wanted posters from before 1908, looking for women who might have assumed new identities. In Pittsburgh archives, she found a breakthrough. A wanted poster from 1907. Wanted, Clara Hoffman, age 30, suspected in the death of her husband, Friedrich Hoffman. Subject fled Pittsburgh after husband's sudden death. Insurance investigation suggests poisoning. Subject should be considered dangerous. The poster included a photograph, a formal portrait showing a woman with sharp features. Rebecca compared facial structure, body type, and posture to the visible elements in the wedding photograph. The height, build, and positioning of hands matched. Rebecca researched Friedrich Hoffman's death. In 1907, he'd died suddenly after 3 weeks of illness. His widow, Clara, had tried to collect a substantial life insurance policy, but the insurance company had become suspicious of the rapid death and young wife. They'd demanded an autopsy. The autopsy revealed arsenic poisoning. By the time results were confirmed, Clara Hoffman had fled Pittsburgh with whatever cash she could gather. The life insurance was never paid, but Clara had learned from the mistake. In future murders, she'd avoid insurance policies that required medical scrutiny. She'd simply marry wealthy men and inherit directly. Clara Hoffman had become Stone, a new identity for a new method. Between 1908 and 1912, she'd perfected her system, moving through cities, killing husbands, taking their money, and disappearing before suspicion could develop. But who was Clara before Friedrich? Rebecca traced back further. Clara Hoffman had been born Clara Henshaw in 1877 in rural Pennsylvania. She'd married young to a farmer named John Henshaw. In 1905, John had died, officially from influenza, but now Rebecca suspected poison. Clara had collected John's life insurance and modest savings, moved to Pittsburgh, married the wealthier Friedrich Hoffman, and graduated to her career as a serial husband killer. By 1912, when she'd married Thomas Whitmore in Chicago, she'd killed at least 8 men over 7 years. Rebecca found records for Harrison Photography Studio and discovered the photographer's grandson, Michael Harrison, still lived in Chicago. She contacted him, explaining her investigation. "My grandfather kept detailed journals about his work," Michael said. "I have them in storage. Let me look for 1912. 2 days later, Michael called back. "I found the entry about that wedding. My grandfather wrote several paragraphs. He was disturbed by it." Michael read the entry aloud. June 22, 1912. "Most unusual wedding session today. Mr. Thomas Whitmore, prominent businessman, arrived with his new bride for formal portrait. The bride insisted on keeping her veil completely drawn for the photograph. Mr. Whitmore seemed uncomfortable with this but deferred to his wife's wishes. She claimed religious modesty, but her manner suggested something else. Not modesty, but deliberate concealment. She held items in her hands during the session, appeared to be photographs, though she positioned them against her dress where the veil would obscure them. She was extremely particular about lighting and exposure time. Mr. Whitmore seemed deeply enamored, called her "my dear Helen," spoke of their honeymoon plans. She barely responded, focused entirely on ensuring her face remained hidden. After they left, I felt profound unease. Something about that woman seemed wrong. I've photographed hundreds of weddings. I've never seen a bride so determined to hide her face. Rebecca asked if the original glass plate negative still existed. Michael searched his grandfather's archive and found it, carefully preserved. Rebecca arranged to have it scanned at even higher resolution than the print. The enhanced scan revealed more detail in the reflected photographs the bride had been holding. Rebecca could now see that these weren't just portraits. They were newspaper clippings, obituaries of the dead husbands, carefully cut out and kept as trophies. Clara had been holding obituaries of her victims during her wedding to her next victim. Rebecca traced what happened after Thomas Whitmore's death. Clara, using the name Helen Whitmore, had sold his business and house by September 1912, walking away with approximately $85,000, equivalent to over $2 million today. She'd liquidated everything and vanished from Chicago. Rebecca searched for the pattern continuing in other cities after mid-1912. She found a possibility in Milwaukee. November 1912, a widower named George Patterson married Catherine Stone. December 1912, George Patterson died, heart failure. His widow inherited and disappeared. Then the trail went cold. No similar cases appeared in any Midwestern city after late 1912. Either Clara had moved to regions with poorer records, changed her method significantly, or something had stopped her. Rebecca expanded her search to death records. In Portland, Oregon, she found a possibility. April 1913, a woman named Helen Stone died at a charity hospital. Cause: arsenic poisoning. The hospital record noted, patient admitted in severe distress, appeared to have ingested poison accidentally or deliberately. No family located. Patient died within hours. Burial: city cemetery, unmarked grave. The timing, location, and name matched. Rebecca theorized that Clara had accidentally poisoned herself, perhaps confused medications, or took arsenic she'd prepared for a victim. A fitting end for a woman who'd killed 8 or 9 men with poison. Rebecca arranged for exhumation of the Portland grave. DNA analysis would take months. But if this was Clara Hoffman, it would provide closure. The serial husband killer had died from her own weapon, alone and unknown in a charity hospital. Meanwhile, Rebecca had enough evidence to document the crimes and identify the victims. 8 confirmed murders, possibly 9, across 7 years and 8 cities. Fortunes stolen, families destroyed, all by a woman who'd hidden her identity so successfully that she'd operated for years without anyone connecting the deaths. Until one wedding photograph, with a veil that had accidentally captured her trophies, finally revealed the truth 112 years later. Rebecca held a press conference at Chicago Police Headquarters, revealing her findings. Behind her, screens displayed the wedding photograph with enhanced images showing the reflected obituaries in the veil. Between 1908 and 1912, a woman using the alias Stone married at least 8 wealthy widowers across the Midwest, Rebecca began. Within weeks of each marriage, her husband died of apparent heart failure. Modern forensic analysis proves these men were poisoned with arsenic. The killer inherited their estates, totaling approximately $400,000 in 1912 currency, equivalent to roughly $10 million today, and disappeared between each murder. She explained how the wedding photograph had preserved evidence. Clara Hoffman, the killer's true identity, kept obituaries of her victims. During her wedding to Thomas Whitmore in Chicago, she held these obituaries, and they were reflected in her veil's lace during the long photographic exposure. She thought hiding her face would protect her identity. Instead, her veil captured evidence of her previous crimes. Rebecca displayed the identified victims: John Henshaw, 1905, Friedrich Hoffman, 1907, Charles Bennett, 1908, Henry Morrison, 1909, George Sullivan, 1909, William Bradford, 1910, James Harrison, 1910, Robert Mitchell, 1911, Thomas Whitmore, 1912, possibly George Patterson, 1912. These men were targeted because they were wealthy, widowed, and lonely. Clara exploited their desire for companionship, married them quickly, poisoned them slowly, and moved on with their money. She believed she'd committed perfect crimes. But this photograph tells a different story. The media response was immediate. Black Widow killer's century-old crimes solved. Wedding veil reflects serial killer's victims. Woman poisoned 8 husbands, hid identity for decades. The case fascinated the public. A female serial killer, hidden identity, crimes spanning states, all revealed through Victorian-era photography. Descendants of the victims were located. Many had grown up with family stories about ancestors who'd remarried and died suddenly, but no one had connected these deaths or suspected murder. Now, finally, their families had answers. 3 months after Rebecca's revelation, a memorial service was held at Chicago's Graceland Cemetery, where Thomas Whitmore was buried. Descendants of 5 identified victims attended, meeting for the first time, connected by their ancestors' shared fate. A memorial stone was installed, listing all confirmed victims. In memory of those lost to Clara Hoffman's crimes 1905-1912, they deserved better. They are remembered. Rebecca stood before the gathering. These men were killed because they were vulnerable, widowed, lonely, seeking companionship. Clara Hoffman exploited that vulnerability systematically. For over a century, their deaths were recorded as natural, as unfortunate but unsuspicious. Today, we acknowledge the truth. They were murdered by someone they trusted, someone they'd married, someone who'd promised to love them. Thomas Whitmore's great-grandson spoke. My family always wondered about Thomas's sudden death so soon after remarriage. My great-grandmother, Thomas's daughter from his first marriage, suspected something wrong but couldn't prove it. She died never knowing the truth. Today, 112 years later, we finally have answers. My great-grandfather was murdered. His killer stole not just his money but his life, his future, his time with family. Thank you, Detective Walsh, for giving him justice, even if it came long after his death. Other descendants shared similar gratitude. The memorial provided closure, acknowledgement, and dignity for victims whose deaths had been dismissed as natural for over a century. After the service, Rebecca returned to her office and carefully packed the wedding photograph for the Chicago History Museum. It would be displayed in an exhibition titled Hidden Behind the Veil, Clara Hoffman and the Husband She Murdered. Rebecca looked at the photograph one final time. Thomas Whitmore stood proud and happy beside his new bride, unaware he had only 3 weeks to live. Clara stood beside him, her face completely hidden, holding obituaries of the men she'd already killed. You thought hiding your face would protect you, Rebecca said quietly. You thought you'd gotten away with everything. But your veil betrayed you. The evidence you carried, your trophies, your victims' obituaries, was captured in the lace. You tried to remain invisible, but you made your crimes visible. And now everyone knows what you did. Your victims are remembered. You're revealed. Justice, even 112 years late, has been served. The photograph would ensure Clara Hoffman's crimes were never forgotten, and more importantly, that her victims, 8 men who'd sought love and found death, would finally be remembered not as men who'd died of weak hearts, but as men who'd been murdered, whose lives had mattered, whose deaths deserved acknowledgement and truth.